This video will be about the executive branch for Ohio's government. So again, don't confuse this with the federal government. This is just about Ohio. And you could talk about the executive branch for any of the 50 states. Most of them are about the same, with a few changes here or there, but we're going to focus on Ohio. So again, everything that we're talking about, the Ohio government, whether we're talking about the governor or the General Assembly who makes the laws or the state Supreme Court, all of that comes from this Constitution that you've already seen a video on, provided by the state of Ohio, and how we've changed our Constitution. Just to remember that the federal government's Constitution is relatively short, but Ohio's Constitution is a long, like book. It covers lots of things. And everything we're going to talk about today is in this Constitution. So if we think about downtown Columbus, Columbus is the capital city, AL, when you spell capital, AL. But this is the Capitol building, OL, meaning it's a building. So the Capitol building is downtown in the capital city, and this building is where the General Assembly meets. Generally, we would say this is their building, but the governor and lieutenant governor and members of the executive branch will come to this building quite often, and the governor has an office in this building. So if you've ever taken a tour down there, you may have gone by the governor's office. He also has another office across the street in a big office building, but this is where his ceremonial office is. So we're zooming in on this chart. The executive branch is different than the federal government in some ways. Again, executive, the root word is execute, meaning they're the ones who make sure that the laws are followed that are passed, but there are some big differences when we're talking about Ohio's executive branch. As you can see from this chart, we're talking about the governor and lieutenant governor, the cabinet, and some other elected positions. So in our federal government, so the USA, federal government, the president and the vice president are the only ones who are actually elected. They, mostly the president, would then appoint everyone else in the executive branch. Whereas in the state executive branch, there are several positions that are elected by the voters of Ohio. So this chart shows you that a little bit. You could pause here if you want to look at it a little closer. There's the Ohio flag. And by the way, that's the governor's flag you can see there. It's kind of interesting. The governor has his own flag or her own flag. So Ohio's governor. This is the one we think of when we think of the executive branch in Ohio. This position is the chief executive for the state, meaning they are the one ultimately to make sure that state law is enforced. They have the muscle to make sure that when the General Assembly, the legislative branch, passes a law, that it is enforced, that people follow that law. But if you want to be governor of Ohio, you have to win a statewide election, meaning every county of the 88 counties has to vote for you, and you get more votes than the other person, and you then start a 4-year term as governor. You can run for governor twice, so 8 years is the maximum that you can be governor. That's by state law. You enforce state law, as I mentioned, so if they pass a law that says, the General Assembly passes a law that says the speed limit on the interstate here in Ohio is 65, and people are going over that. Well, the governor's highway patrol will make sure that people who break that law are stopped and ticketed or arrested or whatever the requirement might be. They also have, the governor has pardon power. So if you're convicted of a state crime, the governor can get you out of jail, and no one can do anything about it. Again, it has to be a state crime. So we've talked about federal versus state. Federal crime would be like counterfeiting, drug trafficking, any kind of a federal offense. But state crime would be murder or stealing a car, assault and battery, beating someone up. The president can get you out of federal prison for doing federal crimes with a pardon. The governor can get you out of state prisons using his power or her power to pardon. The president can veto, but so can the governor. So in Ohio, the governor can veto laws that are passed by the General Assembly, and generally that means those laws are dead. They can be overridden, So the veto can be overridden by the General Assembly. You have to bring back the House of Representatives and the Ohio Senate, and they can override the governor's veto, but it takes 3/5 of both of the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate. Also, the governor makes appointments to offices. So all of the state offices, openings, whether we're talking about directors or trustees, the governor would appoint those people, generally with the consent of the Senate. And the governor is the commander-in-chief of the state military. So the National Guard and the Air National Guard, the governor is in charge of that group or those groups. And if there's an emergency, the governor can call them into action, whether a city might be flooding or there's rioting, the governor has that authority. We also have a lieutenant governor, so kind of like the vice president of the state, except there's some big differences. But if you want to be a lieutenant governor in Ohio, you also have to run on a statewide election, meaning you have to be on the ballot in all 88 counties. You run with the governor on a ticket, and if you win, you serve a 4-year term. And the only responsibility for Ohio's lieutenant governor is to step in if the governor quits or resigns or dies or is impeached. So usually lieutenant governor takes over a state agency or maybe a task or a big job the governor wants done, and it's a way to put someone who has been elected in charge of a big project. So Ohio's lieutenant governor, and there's been a few instances where Ohio's lieutenant governor had to step up when the governor quit or the governor gets elected to president. That's happened a few times through the years. But generally, lieutenant governor serves kind of like as a vice president, just ready to step in. The governor also has a cabinet that advises the governor and leads state agencies. So all of the cabinet would be appointed by the governor and therefore could be fired by the governor. So whether you're running the state division of wildlife and parks, or you're running the Department of Aging or Children's Services for the state, you're appointed by the governor, and then you'd be confirmed by the Ohio Senate. So the governor has a cabinet the same way that the president of the United States has a cabinet. But what's different about Ohio is that there are other statewide elected members of or officers of the executive branch. So we have what we call Ohio's Secretary of State. This is very different from the United States Secretary of State, which represents America around the world when the president isn't there, basically our chief ambassador to the world. Ohio's Secretary of State is elected, unlike the National Secretary of State, which is appointed. So we elect our Secretary of State in Ohio. You got to win, get more votes than your opponent. You have to be on the ballot in all 88 counties. And once you are elected as a Secretary of State, you serve a 4-year term. So this is part of the executive branch in Ohio. The main jobs of the Secretary of State would be to run the elections for the state of Ohio, so to make sure that all of the counties are running fair elections and to oversee those elections and provide any kind of support to the counties as they set up elections. And not just presidential elections, but every year we have an election, right? So it's not just the big, exciting presidential years, but it's every year. Some years aren't very exciting. We're just voting on maybe smaller offices, but the Secretary of State makes sure that the counties are following all the rules, making sure there's proper procedures, and everyone's vote is counted. They also, at the Secretary of State, whoever the Secretary of State is kind of chief of Ohio's businesses. So if you want to open a new business in Ohio, you have to register with the Secretary of State, pay a little money, and then they will kind of guide you on how to set up your business and what you need to do. So there's basically 2 big jobs of Ohio's Secretary of State: election chief and to register businesses. So, question, can the governor fire the Secretary of State of Ohio? The answer is no, because the Ohio Secretary of State is elected just like the governor is elected. The governor can't fire the lieutenant governor. The governor can't fire the Secretary of State. They're all elected on their own. The Auditor of State is another part of the executive branch, another office that you run for, and if you get elected, you have more votes than the person running against you. After all 88 counties have been counted up, then you are the Auditor of State. It's a 4-year term. This one doesn't get a lot of attention, but this position makes sure that all state money is accounted for and spent properly. So whether we're talking about a university or a prison or the state parks, they're given money every year by the General Assembly in a budget, and they make sure, the Auditor of State, this person makes sure, and his office or her office makes sure that every part of our state government is spending money appropriately and it is accounted for. So they make sure that people aren't stealing, are committing fraud, all of those state offices. Then there are lots of state offices across Ohio that get money and need to be kind of watched over. Another elected position in the executive branch would be the Attorney General. So the Ohio Attorney General is a voted position, statewide, elected, 4-year term, and really this, as you can kind of tell from the title, top lawyer in the state and really the top law enforcement. So most legal actions, whether we're talking about law enforcement or courts, typically are on the county level. So we'll learn more about that in the judicial branch video. But the Attorney General kind of oversees all of the counties to make sure that Franklin County or Hamilton County or Cuyahoga County, they're all following the state law about how you have a court proceeding, whether you get when to get juries, all of that. So they basically watch over the court system and the law enforcement of the state. They also do have some investigative power, like the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, which you see on the screen there, the BCI. They do a lot of crime scene investigating. Some counties don't have a lot of resources, so the state can send in special investigators to help figure out what happened and maybe figure out if someone should be charged for committing a crime. The Ohio Attorney General cannot be fired by the governor, right? This person is elected. They are the top lawyer in the state, and they have a lot to do with law enforcement. Ohio's treasurer is also a statewide elected position that's part of the executive branch. The Ohio treasurer makes sure that Ohio's taxes are collected and that Ohioans are paying fees when they need to help run the government. No one really generally likes paying taxes, but they are the price you pay for a civilized society. So if you want roads and trash collection and law enforcement and fire trucks, you have to pay taxes. If you want state parks, you want to make sure that there's fish in Lake Erie, that it's not too polluted. You make sure that you pay your taxes because that is what the government uses, the money the government uses to make sure that Ohio is a good place to live and that we have services that citizens want and expect, and that the environment and animals are taken care of, wildlife and things like that. The treasurer can make investments with Ohio's tax dollars just to try to grow that money a little bit, make money like maybe in stocks or in mutual funds or bonds. But generally, the main job is to oversee tax and make sure the taxes are collected. You can see from this chart, though, like I just took that from the Ohio Treasurer website. It shows kind of where the money is going. It looks like Ohio's bringing in about $93 billion with a B, and how they account for that money, where it's going. So Ohio, through taxes, either sales tax and income tax and fees, brings in about $93 billion, and it's showing you where that money is going. So if you're curious, you can look it up on the Ohio Treasurer website. And finally, the last part of the executive branch, which doesn't always get a ton of attention, is the Board of Education. And I threw this in here because the fact that you're taking government, you didn't have a choice. If you want to graduate, you need government. So this Board of Education decides what students in kindergarten through 12th grade will learn. 19 members, 11 of them are elected by the people of Ohio, and 8 are appointed by the governor. So it's just kind of an odd mix, but it's just the way the law has set it up. And it's a 4-year term. So if you don't like taking these classes, or you don't like taking any classes, you can thank the State Board of Education.